think if violence serves the plot, it makes sense. And I think that if spice serves the plot, it makes sense. And I think that it's like anything else, you're just going to have a tolerance level. That tolerance level might change as you read more and more and stuff like that. But I think everybody has like a hard line for basically anything in a book.
Hello, folks, and welcome to Author Adjacent, a show about the journey from hobbyist writer to professional author. I'm your host, Michael Vadney, and today I am sitting with returning guest, Devin Ford, creator of Bromantasy, a blog where he discusses and reviews fantasy, sci-fi, and romance novels. Welcome back to the show, Devin.
Thank you again for having me. This is going to be a
Of
lot of fun.
course.
I had a lot of fun the last time, so.
I'm glad to have you back because last time we talked about you, your blogger journey, how you started Bromantasy, and how that all got started. But today we're going to be digging into the topic of romance in our sci-fi and fantasy. And the very first thing, right off the bat, what I want to ask you is, from your reviews and the awards and everything that you have done, what makes a romantic subplot in fantasy and sci-fi essential rather than just tacked on?
I often answer this question a very specific way because I think this comes up a lot, and I think this is the barometer for what a lot of people use for romantasy, even though the genre definition really is broad. For me, to graduate from like a subplot to being like an essential piece of a story is that I think if I remove the romantic element or the romantic story, the plot would fall apart. And not just like, oh, the romantic plot, like it would require a significant rewrite on the author's part for the story to work. Because if you removed the romance, motivations are gone, specific plot points, your twist, like so many things have to be tied to it for it to be an essential piece of the story versus kind of like a subplot, I guess is the best terminology for it.
So then, how does romance elevate a story overall?
Romance for me personally, and I think most of the people that enjoy it would hopefully agree. I don't know. I'm not the expert. I don't. I'm definitely not the expert. Let's start with that right there. But I don't think I'm the authority on it. But I do have an opinion. I think that it enhances the connection between the characters. It humanizes them much more. It makes them more believable, and in turn makes you care about them that much more because now not only are you worried like your favorite character might die or so on and so forth, you now also have that added effect of not only may my favorite side character die, but the side character might be the love interest. And now, how is that going to affect my main character at an even deeper level? Because I can put myself in those shoes. Like, God forbid, something happened to my wife or something like that. Somebody that I care about very deeply. Even thinking about it can, like, just kind of make you uncomfortable. So then having that empathetic tie into the story and the characters, I think just elevates and makes a story stick so much more than, I love found family and things like that. Don't get me wrong. And you can have those feelings, but I think it's just a different level when there's that romantic attachment and element to it.
It's almost universal, that feeling, because we intrinsically as human beings feel this need to couple and pair up and to find someone to spend our life with and to love and do all these things. So then when you have that in the story, it is a lot easier for us to kind of get that buy-in, because like you were saying, we can look at our spouse and be like, oh no, what if that happened to you? What would I do?
Yeah. Yeah, it's I will say, for anybody that has kids have ruined me
Oh,
emotionally. I will say so. I love my children to death, but what
you
I
need to
mean when
elaborate.
I say that, yeah, um, it's stuff that probably, like, it still would have hit me in a story, has tremendously changed how impactful it is for me when I read something.
Yeah. That actually kind of reminds me. I was talking to my dad about the Christmas Story, the classic movie that it's on 24/7, and then they
Hmm.
came out with a second one where Ralphie is now the father, and we were talking about both of them. Yeah, it came out like
I did not know
within the
that.
past yeah, within the past like I think 2 years, they made
Oh,
another Christmas Story where Ralphie is the dad. And I was talking to my dad about it, about like which one was better. Do you like the second one? Because a lot of times these things kind of feel like a cash grab. And my
Mm,
dad said he likes them both a lot. The first one is really good about capturing the magic of being a child at Christmas. But the second one was really good because it captures the anxiety and the feeling of being a father at Christmas and trying to make sure that everything is good and perfect for your children and for your family and that you're providing and doing all these things. And that really changed my perspective on the story.
yeah, that's such a good point. I gotta watch it first of all because now I want to watch it. It's funny just to random circle back to books, but it is the reason that I keep pushing off The Road by Cormac McCarthy.
Ooh, elaborate
It's
on that.
so basically everybody recommends that book. They say it's an incredible story, and but it's a story about a father and his kid, and like people say like as a parent that book ruins you. uh
My
so I
God.
am just like it, it's a phenomenal book and like very deep and whatever, but they say that like reading it as a parent compared to reading it as not a parent is like an entirely different experience and like makes it so visceral. And I'm just like I do this often. I love being emotionally wrecked by a story, which is, I don't know, I need therapy, but anyway. um but it also makes me avoid stories for a while sometimes. Like I just started Dark Age from the Red Rising series and I've been avoiding it because everybody says like it's rough.
What is it about books and like book people that we actively seek out that emotional destruction for ourselves?
I am sure there are a lot of therapists making a lot of money answering that question. I wish I knew. I think it's I genuinely think it all comes back to like the empathy thing, but I think it's all probably tied to like feeling the most human in a story because love is great and happiness is great and it's something everybody experiences and like you do remember happy memories and stuff like that, but the things that often stick with you for good or bad are usually the things that are a difficulty or something you've had to overcome, grief, that kind of stuff. I think is always going to be more visceral and more human, and I think that is probably why it sticks more in a story. I'm sure some therapist will watch this one day and be like, "Oh, you should probably sit in a chair." But, it's very much I think that the it all comes down to like emotional impact. Like, I know it's a recurring theme from the last episode and now to this one, but it's genuinely I think what makes books and reading and storytelling so impactful and so great is that deeply human emotional connection to something that isn't real.
Yeah. Again, another callback to the last episode from last week is the ending of Blood Over Righthaven. I'm not going to give away it with any spoilers, but you've read it, I've read it. Like it destroyed me when I got to the end of it. I remember I finished it really early in the morning, and my wife woke up like 10 minutes after I finished the book, and she found me, and I'm just like, I need a hug.
Yeah.
I was
It,
just so destroyed by it, by everything that happened in that story. And a big part of that was because of the romance in that story made me care about these people, not just as individuals, but like their relationship becomes a character in itself. And
yeah,
you get invested in that.
I that story is incredible. Like highly recommend it to anybody. It's even if you're not like a huge emotional reader, the magic system in that story is next
Really
level. And
good.
I again probably the nerd software engineer in me that really likes it because the callback and the tie-in.
It
But
it is very software engineer like. There's a
yeah,
really good logic to it. I like it a lot.
it was super cool. But yeah, the emotional piece of that and I don't want to say found family. I mean, I guess it has some of that, but it's more the just the feeling of responsibility for somebody else and not only that feeling but obviously having that amount of care for somebody else
Hmm.
from one of the other characters. Again, I don't want to spoil anything, but like that is a big essential part of I think why that ending is so impactful too.
Yeah.
That is the part that sticks out with me most, I think, is that relationship at the very end. And again, like the romantic piece of it and all of that ties together and is such an impactful piece. But I think that part, for some reason, for me, is what really sticks out is that very, very end. Um, Sorry, I hope this makes you want to read it because we're not going to tell you any more than that.
I know. Sorry, people. We're not going to spoil it, but go read the book. It's so good.
Yeah, it really is.
Okay, back on task though. So you have highlighted books like Tusk Love and Iron to Flame as like strong entry points for
Mhm.
people, for fantasy fans who want to like dip into romantasy. What are like the key elements that you look for into an introductory romantasy?
So for me, it very much depends on the reader. I will say that I'm a big believer in that recommendations should be tailored to the reader and not, like kind of blanketed. But with the exception of you're not going to be able to know every reader to the extent. So I would say I think Tusk Love is good for people that like Sword and Board Fantasy, big Dungeons and Dragons fans. For anybody that watches Critical Role and doesn't know that is where that came from. That is a story that was made as a joke through the role playing and then became a real thing. But there's a lot of callback to that, but you don't need to have that knowledge. It feels very D&D. Actually, I was surprised by that story because there was so much more action in it than I expected. I expected it to be a love story because that one is pitched much more as a romance than it is a romantasy, I would say, and it hit both sides really really well. I think for entry level stuff I always try to look for stuff that either evenly blends the two pretty well, where it's balanced, where they're both essential but like it's a good mix between the two so you're never like heavy into one or the other, or I try to lean more towards a story that technically I would consider it a romantic subplot even though it's marketed as romantasy. I've recently made a reel about this where I was like, guys like romantasy. I forget what I said exactly, but it was like, guys like romantasy, but it has to earn the story or something, or it has to earn the romance, basically. The romance has to feel earned through the story first, which is essentially a romantic subplot, but we'll call it romantasy because that's what marketing says. But yeah, I think that's a very pivotal part of getting somebody into it. Like, I think the one I recommend most to guys, and this is not a romantasy by marketing standards, but I will die on this hill, and I've said it directly to him, is Empire the Vampire. Yes, Empire the Vampire. Jay Kristoff has a highlighted reel or a highlighted set of stories on his Instagram called Romantasy because this comes up pretty often with his books. When he wrote Nevernight, he had a predominantly like 80 something percent female audience. Like that was his readership, which is very rare for like he's a fantasy author, you know what I mean? Like he was never marketed as a romance author. And then it shifted a little bit with Empire. Like it's definitely I think it's like 70-30 he said or something, but anyway, the thing with his books is that the romance is such an essential piece. Like he says it. Like if you remove the romance from Empire of the Vampire never happens. It's such an impactful piece of it. And then I think the other reason I like to recommend it is a lot of the time it comes down to spice. Like people are spice adverse without having read spice because there's just the connotations behind it, whatever. We don't have to dive in all like the other stuff. But Jay Kristoff, in my opinion, writes probably some of the best spice in all of it. And that includes romantasy authors. And I say that because I think what a lot of people miss and the difference between a romantasy and a classic fantasy per se with a spice scene in it is that, and again, this tends to be where female authors shine and male authors, it's very much like descriptive. This is what's going on. Maybe you get some detail and then it's out, fade to black, or it's just the actions and the descriptions and that's it. When you read spice in something like a romantasy, or the reason I highlight Empire of the Vampire is because Jay Kristoff does this, it's very much the introspective emotions of the moment of that character, what they're feeling, what they're thinking, how it's making them feel mixed with the descriptive pieces of it. And I think that's where a lot of people don't fully comprehend what spice is. And I think that, like, I don't know, I hate using the word spice and smut because I think it's ridiculous. I use it because I don't want to get shadow banned on whatever platform I'm talking about it on. But I think there's a clear delineation between what is spice and what is smut. And smut, in my opinion, is only going to be found in an erotica book. It's not going to be found in a romantasy. Like, you might get a lot of spice or some heavy spice, but there's always some kind of romantic, or, well, yeah, romantic component, but like the emotional component of what's going on in the scene. That is why I think it's so impactful, and that tends to be much better written and handled by female authors than male authors, in my experience of what I've read. Again, Jay Kristoff being the exception, and that's why I always pitch his book, because it's so gritty, it's so dark, it is so fantasy, epic fantasy coded, but it blends that in perfectly.
Yeah. I will actually throw in another person's hat into the exception pile for a very specific series, Brent Weeks the Lightbringer series.
Really? I've heard
Yes.
that too. That's not the first time I've heard that. It's just one of those ones where, like, I want to get to it. It's you reading
It
is an
it
adventure.
really surprised me. So that was the series that kind of put me on the path of, you know what? Not all spice is bad. And I read that series and it was really well executed. And it's about the emotional beats and the changes in their relationship during those moments. Now, I did eventually graduate to things like Invisible Life of Addie LaRue and stuff like that,
I
which
have not
I
read
love
that.
this book. Oh, it is one of my favorites. It's definitely heavier on the romance than the fantasy,
Hmm.
but it's so good. But
I've heard good things.
yeah. But back to Brent Weeks, like the Brent Weeks Lightbringer series is some of the best character work I've ever seen. And that includes in the spice. Spice that serves the story. It's not there just for, gratuitous sex and violence. It's there because there's a purpose. It's
Yeah.
fulfilling a need in the story. It's fulfilling an emotional beat. And
Yeah.
it was amazingly well done. Highly suggest that series. Now I'm punching my mic. You punched it the last episode. I'll punch it this episode. We'll see who punches it the next one.
My mic is angry, apparently. It keeps blinking at me. I guess that means it's probably needs to be plugged in, but it's fine.
Oh, okay. Let me
No,
know if you need to take a break.
it'll survive. I checked
Okay,
it. It's
good.
at like 20. It starts blinking at 20%, which I hate, but here we are.
Okay, so you got a while. But yeah, definitely check out Brent Weeks' Lightbringer series. It's really good. I finally convinced one of my friends to read it, and he's going through it for the first time, and he keeps texting me like, "Oh my god!" I'm like, "I know." It's so fun to like re-experience the story through him.
Yeah, my favorite thing about recommending books is getting that, like, getting to, I don't know, it's like making somebody watch your favorite TV show with you for the first time, where you're
Yep.
like watching them more than you're watching it, because you're like, the parts coming up. I will
Yep.
say the other side of that coin is nothing is worse than when you're making somebody watch your favorite show, or I guess recommending a book, and they don't think it's as funny or didn't like it as much as you, and you're like, oh no, you're like, what do you mean that's funny? Like, what? No, that's funny, you're wrong.
Yep. Oh, 100%. There are definitely a few things where him and I are diverging on this series, but for the most part, he seems to be really enjoying it. So I'm like, awesome. Okay, mostly success. I'll take it.
Yeah, that's
So, what common misconceptions do you try to address with bromantasy then? Like as far as like romance and spice goes within fantasy and sci-fi?
I think it's mostly that, you know spice is not as prevalent as everybody thinks. I think that's probably the first thing I always try to address. Like, Fourth Wing is a good example of this. You can critique whatever you want about it. Maybe you don't like the writing, maybe the world building you felt was a little weak, or the plot might have felt had like it had a couple holes. I often tell people, first of all, she was a predominantly romance writer. Like, that's all she wrote. Like, New York Times best-selling, like, phenomenal, huge in her genre, and jumped into fantasy and clearly did her research, like, hits the fantasy notes and everything like that. Yeah, like, it's not, you know, Erickson level world building on her first book into fantasy, but it has all the good beats. It's fast paced, but it's not, everybody's like, oh my God, there's so much spice. There's so much spice. I think there's maybe 10 pages out of 300 and something. When you look at it from like an objective standpoint of numbers alone, like it's nothing. It's a blip on the radar compared to the rest of the story. And that is always what everybody seems to somehow get hung up on. And often I say it's people that haven't read it and are just automatically assume that the spice is just not nice.
So, how much spice is too much, and how much is like not enough?
That is always going to be incredibly subjective. I try to say to people that you should test your tolerance. I I wouldn't say like go read, find a spice chapter in a random book and read it with no context because that's always going to feel weird and gratuitous in my opinion because you're just, skipping to the part. It's like fast forwarding the 45-minute show for the, 30 seconds of on-screen time. But I try to normally recommend books that are what I would quote unquote say lighter on the spice, where it is not like a focal point, it's not the forefront. Usually in most romantasies that are series, the spice tends to ramp pretty slow. Um, so it kind of eases you into it. Fourth Wing again is a good example of that. It's a fast-paced book. It's very easy to get into. It's one that I think I recommend probably more than something like Akatar. I think Akatar is a very slow burn in the beginning and very, it's a true Beauty and the Beast retelling for like the first two thirds, and that's kind of a hard sell for a lot of people. So I try to give them like something like Fourth Wing because it's pretty quick. Like you're in it right away. It's very action packed. It's fast paced, but it's got, a good story. It's got bonded rider tropes. It's got all those good fantasy pieces that you look for. Um, but there's some spice in it and there's a romance story that's essential to the plot. It's spice again subjective. I think that spice in my opinion is not gratuitous unless like you said like it's just there to be on the page. There is no emotional component to it. Like it's literally just a descriptive spice scene. And yeah, maybe one of those can be in a book, but like if that's all the spice scenes are in every single moment, then I wouldn't go as far as saying it's erotica, but I would say that it's not exactly what I think spice is. It's not there to enhance the story. It's there to just be there and be included, which I just think is bad writing. I don't think it's, you know, I don't think it's somebody trying to sneak in like an erotica book as a fantasy. I think it's just poor storytelling.
Which, unfortunately, that does exist. Like, if
Yeah,
you're going to have
it's
good stories, you are going to have bad stories. You can't have
yeah,
one without the other because we are comparing them and ranking them.
going to suffer from that.
Yeah. So, as you've gotten into like romance and romantasy and sci-mantasy, is that how you say that?
Scimantasy, yes.
We're going to go with that. Do you
There's a lot of
find,
debate.
yeah. Do you find that you become like desensitized to this as you are exposed to it more?
I don't think so. I often make I often equate it to violence. So the reason I do that, and people get mad often because they're when I make the comparison, this is where I've seen like I get the most pushback. I don't want to say mad. I get the most pushback when I make the comparison of violence to spice. The reason I make the comparison is I don't believe that violence is gratuitous. Violence can be gratuitous, but I think if violence serves the plot, it makes sense. And I think that if spice serves the plot, it makes sense. And I think that it's like anything else, you're just going to have a tolerance level. That tolerance level might change as you read more and more and stuff like that. But I think everybody has like a hard line for basically anything in a book. It's if you're a grimdark reader, you're probably more comfortable with darker stories, more violent, more descriptive scenes than somebody who normally reads, like a high or epic fantasy that doesn't really get dark. Not that they don't have dark moments, but it's not like the focus. Your character's very much a hero. You understand his motivations, things like that. Where like in a grimdark, you get much more morally gray. Like you question whether or not you would support that choice if that was something that's okay to do for the greater good, all that kind of stuff. I don't think your tolerance necessarily changes. I think it's you start to recognize patterns and things like that, but I don't think people become desensitized to spice any more than they do violence.
That's a good comparison. I like comparing spice to violence. I think it makes complete sense to me, and you know, all those people giving you pushback, they can shove off.
The king of fantasy. Well, I say this loosely because this will be a hot button debate, but George R. R. Martin has a great take on this, in my opinion. I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact quote. He said, "But if I write a character in a scene where I bury my axe into the hilt of this guy's neck as deep as it can go, nobody bats an eye. But if I bury something else in a scene in a bedroom, everybody has a heart attack." He's like, what is the difference? It's immersive fantasy. He's like, I want it to be gratuitous to an extent. I want to be immersed in that world. He said, my characters are fat. They sit there and they eat until they're ready to explode. And I describe the food and all this. And he said, nobody cares. He said, but the second you go into a cave for a couple pages and people are up in arms about it and that it's too much and it's gratuitous, he said, I want to be immersed in the stories that I'm reading and I want to be immersed. I want my readers to be immersed in what I'm writing. And there's a very clear delineation between the two, and it's got nothing to do with writing.
Yeah, yeah, man. That's. I think I've heard that quote before, but it's been a long time since I've thought about it. Yeah, people, get on it. um, so, can you share an example of like a sci-fi or fantasy series where the romantic subplot dramatically improved or even saved the plot?
Saved is tough. I don't know. I, I think I think saving a plot is rough because I don't think if a plot is so far into a point where I think it needs to be saved, it's probably not going to get saved. I'm That's just me probably, but that, that's how much I feel about it. Like it's very hard to save a plot. Like an ending can save a book, but I don't think a plot that just isn't going to be saved. But I will say, like a great example, I think of romance really enhancing a story is Umbra by Amber Toro. That was one of my top reads last year. It is a Scimantasy. Her Sentient Stars series is 2 books, third book coming out soonish. But book one was so good, and kudos to Amber for holding out. There is no spice in book one. It's all romance, it's all yearn, and it's a space opera on top of it. Like it is such a genre blend that I didn't expect and didn't expect to enjoy as much. I mean, it makes sense on the surface now in hindsight, but it's so phenomenal. But that is a story where I think if you remove that element, it would lose so much of what makes it great.
There's a lot of pining in that book.
Oh yeah.
Like I read it a while ago, but yeah, there's a lot of pining in that book, and pining is satisfying when it's done well. Pining is
Yes.
really fun to read.
It makes the payoff when it does finally happen that much better. I always joke that a lot of people like insta love and or insta lust to love and that kind of stuff, and I'm just kind of like I always feel it's pretty unbelievable. It's one thing to like look at somebody and be like, oh my god, but and that's kind of where it ends. But I always joke that I call it the Pinkie Test. So if there's moments in a book where the tension is high and you can feel the yearn, and what makes it good is like you'll have the moment where they'll brush pinkies and then it's a 3 pages of them internalizing and freaking out about it because they're over analyzing every little piece of it and what it means. And that is like, if that lands, I know it's a good book. If that feels like it's just thrown in there, then maybe the romance isn't that great and you haven't like done the yearning justice. But like those kind of things, I will say like it's a great the yearning barometer, I guess.
In a future book, I now must have touching pinkies
I'm
just to see
telling
what
you.
happens.
But it's that everybody's been there. I think like especially younger. I think that's probably what I enjoy about it. It's that nervous like you like the other person and you don't know if they like you, and then you have that moment where you touch and now you're in your head like, "Oh my god, I didn't mean to touch her. Does she hate me now?" You know, that younger thinking and that younger self, and now getting to see the other side of it sometimes depending on how the POVs are set up is always just fun. Like I think it can be well done. I also think that it can be poorly done where you're like you both are just now having a miscommunication trope just to extend this, and that's bad.
So I'm actually going to bring this back to Brent Weeks Lightbringer series. One of the things that makes it really good is the lack of what you just described, which I call cheap drama, where this problem would be 100% solved if you weren't idiots. And there's absolutely none of that in this series. Where like, is there miscommunication? Yes, because that is the reality. Sometimes that happens, but it's not dragged out like we're on a Friends sitcom, and we're going to get through this issue much faster than you expect it to, and it's going to be satisfying because when people deal with their problems and people react realistically to those dealings, that's a better story.
Yes, I agree. It's funny you brought up Iron Flame because that is one of my biggest critiques of that book. Oh my god. The forced there's a very unrealistic plot point in my opinion. People might come for me, but whatever. Where she wants him to tell her something that he has to keep secret because they're big on telling each other the truth. Like it's the thing that has to happen for the relationship to work. And he is essentially responsible for all of these things that he can't talk about, even to her. And it is just belabored and it drives me crazy because I'm like, no one, if that's truly how you believe, then walk away. Like you would have left. Like you wouldn't have fought about this for a month and a half, basically, is what it felt like in my life.
Oh my
Yeah,
god.
but no, that is one thing I will say about Iron Flame that drove me absolutely insane. That book is saved, that one specifically, by the dragons, and I will die on that hill.
That is good to know. I'm actually very curious. Like, what is your favorite, either romantic subplot or romantasy or sci-mantasy? Yeah,
Oh,
that was hard. Yeah, what is your favorite?
oh, that's tough. If I had to like pick a book right now to like put in somebody's hand, like no matter who it was, I would recommend it on the drop of a dime. It's probably A Forbidden Alchemy by Stacey McEwen. Um,
Hmm.
super interesting, good romance, earned, a lot of yearning, no like insta love kind of stuff. But it's the way I always describe it is it's Peaky Blinders with magic. Like,
That sounds awesome.
it's so well done. The characters are so realistic. Like the situation, none of it feels like contrived or like you don't like, even though it's fantasy. Anybody that's read fantasy, like you'll find yourself questioning, like, yeah, this is a magical world where dragons and spells and all this stuff, and you're going, would that really happen? Which is an insane thing to say, but it has to
Yeah,
be somewhat believable on some level. And I think that book does it so well in every aspect. Like it's just so good. It's so fun. It's literally Peaky Blinders with magic. Like it's got that you know Renaissance mining town vibe, and there's like some kind of like a little bit of science mixed in there where they like invent things to make things work. Like it's good. Like all of it is good.
I have to write this down. Add this
Phenomenal.
to my DVR.
Book two is coming out in July, and this showed up at my door very recently. Um,
Ooh.
which I don't know if I technically was supposed to show it when I got it, because it was funny. I didn't know I was getting it. Fun little side story. My publicist, or the publicist that I have contact with at Saga, I had reached out and I was like, hey, I would love to get a copy of this, whatever. And she didn't email me back. And I was like, oh, whatever. Like anybody that's worked with publicists, like you never take offense to it. Their inboxes
Yeah.
are flooded. But she's, the real deal. So all of a sudden I came home and I had a package from Saga. And I'm like, what the hell is this? And I opened it and it was this. And in the card, it was funny. She wrote, whatever she wrote. And then she's like, I know I owe you an email. And she signed her name. And that's how you know is a good publicist, because she knows that her inbox is a mess and she didn't email me, but she didn't forget about me. Um, but anyway, I showed it on my story, and then like 2 days later, Saga put up a post that they were giving away 3 physical arcs of the book, and like Stacey McEwen made a reel about it. And then in the list, it was like, these will be the first books to go out in the U.S. And I was like,
Not
I
quite.
I DM'd Stacey, and she's like, oh, I would have just. She's like, I was posting about it when they told me not to. She's like, so I wouldn't worry about it. I was like, okay.
Don't make liars out of them. It's not your
Yeah.
fault, but still.
No, it was
Oh
good though.
man.
Stacey McEwen, by the way, one of the nicest people. She's hysterical. If you don't follow her on socials, she's so much fun. And so, reading, what the one thing I find amazing about reading, you can reach out to any author, and 99% of the time, you will get a response, which I think
Yeah.
is wild. It is like the one media genre where people love everything, and you can directly interact with the people that are creating it.
Yeah, I absolutely loved like the book community and the author community for that. Like everyone feels like when you first join into it, it feels like, oh my God, they're so far above me. They'll
Yes.
never look down on little old me.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's just randomly you'll be talking on the internet and they'll just be like, hey guys, what's up? Yeah, I got something to say about this subject. God, I'm talking about him a lot in this episode, but that happened to me with Brent Weeks, where I was talking about one of his books with somebody on like X or social media or something like that, and he popped in. And he's like, "Yeah, this is why I did that," and I was like, "Oh shit, what are you doing here?"
Yeah,
There should be at least 10 people between me and you.
it's so crazy. Again, to bring it back to people we're talking about, Jay Kristoff. When I went to
Yeah.
his event, to his signing, and I was talking to him, and I was talking about the review of Dawn or whatever, and he's like, "Oh my god, I remember your review," and da da da. You're the Bromantasy guy, and I was like, "That's crazy."
He knows my name.
Yeah, I was like, "That's so cool." But again, another person, like one of the most humble people I've ever talked to.
Yeah, it's really amazing just how approachable most people are in this community because they're just people that like stories, and if you like reading stories, they like writing stories, so you have
Yeah.
something in common already.
Yeah, it's
They're just people.
one thing I love about indie, especially, is like talk about even more accessible. Like somebody like
Oh yeah.
Kristoff or like Stacey McEwen. When you have that kind of like, uh, I will call it what it is, that level of fame, you do get back to people like, but it could be days sometimes. Where like indie, I read What Blood Remembers by C. William Phillips, and I was in his DMs like as I was reading it, yelling at him about things that were happening, and he was laughing and being like, "No, this is why I did this." And I was like, "I don't care, you're wrong." And he's like, "No, I'm not, because I wrote it." And I'm like, "Death of the author." But anyway, that's a whole other story.
That's a beautiful moment.
Great book, by the way, for anybody. I'm not a thriller reader, but phenomenal. I can't believe it's a debut. That's another indie debut that I will praise all the time. Like, mind blown that that was a
Yeah.
debut.
I really feel like the bar for indie quality is just constantly
Oh,
going up. And like I've talked about this with people in the past, and like the bar of entry is very low to get into
yes.
indie publishing. Anyone can do it, but the quality, like the ceiling, is it's rising every day, and it's easily on par with anything that comes out with on like traditional publishing. You can get a
Yeah.
lot of really good books through indie.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. I often equate it like this for a lot of people. I say that it used to be you went indie because you couldn't get queries, or you couldn't get somebody to pick up your query. And now it's like a conscious choice where people are deciding to just go indie. And I think like another great recent example of this is like Maurice Affridge with Cello Skate. Like he very recently got picked up by Saga Press, and Maurice, for anybody that's an indie author, go follow Maurice on socials. He's doing an entire series about indie to trad and like what his goals were, what he set out with, how he ended up getting the deal with Saga, and all of this kind of stuff. And it's, for me, who's not an author, I do love like, I love shows like How It's Made. So getting the peek behind the curtain of how things work is always fun for me, even though it doesn't benefit me a lot. Um, but just hearing like, he talks about sales, like sales is not your most important metric. He's like, yeah, sales are great, like going in and showing people sales means something. He's like, but he's like, word of mouth community, getting people to read your book and writing a good book is so much more important than how many books you can sell. He's like, anybody can market. He's like, you can market the hell out of your book, sell a shit ton of them, but if people aren't enjoying it, they're not going to talk about it even though they bought it. So he's like, yeah, you'll make money, but you're not going to hit that level that you want to hit if that's your goal, where you're gonna end up in front of people that will be able to make these things happen.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a great example of someone that really had a goal, who knew what he wanted and just went after it.
Yeah, I that's
Damn.
and again another person. I know I keep using the word humble, but Maurice might be one of the most humble and nicest people. Like I can't think of somebody more deserving of that success happening. Um,
Yeah, definitely congratulations to him.
yeah, it's awesome to see.
Getting back on task. I know we keep
Sorry.
getting off subject. No, I'm doing it too. It's not just your fault. But something I did want to ask from your blogger and your reader perspective, you have called Romantasy as like half fantasy, half romance, very emphasized on that 50-50 split. What advice would you give to authors who are writing romance into their sci-fi and into their fantasy worlds to make it feel authentic and integral to the plot?
Again, I don't know what the writing process looks like, so take this with a grain of salt. But from a reader perspective, it has to feel natural and right. Like it has to feel real and human, and like it can't be perfect. It has to have flaws. There is I don't think I've ever met anyone that's in a relationship, like past the first couple months, the honeymoon phase, that doesn't have some kind of a conflict, doesn't have a strife with their significant other. Everything is not going to be perfect. You know, if you're not comfortable writing spice, don't write spice. I will say that. Like it can't feel robotic. Like it can't feel like I'm, you know, it has to have a purpose. Like I know we touched on it before, like it can't just be in there for gratuitous purposes, but I would also argue, especially right now with romantasy being so popular and so many people moving towards that kind of storytelling because it's what's published, at such a high rate, it has to be, natural and earned, and like it can't just be in there to be in there. So like even if it's not in there in gratuitous, if it's just thrown in there and it feels like medical or like textbook, I guess is probably a better way to say it. Like if I'm sitting in a sex ed class watching the movie while I'm reading your book, I'm not going to have a good time either. Just like if my book, or if I'm reading it and it feels like I'm watching an X-rated video, I'm probably not going to enjoy it either. There's a spectrum and you can go to the wrong side of both, I think. But yeah, it's got to feel human, it's got to feel earned, it's got to be natural and feel natural. I would argue if you probably want it to feel natural as a writer. Like if you're writing it and it doesn't feel good, it's probably not good. And I'm sure that applies to every other piece of your writing too. Again, not somebody that writes, but like, I mean, writing my reviews, again, not like a great comparable, but if I'm writing something and like it doesn't feel good to me, or like I feel like I'm bored writing it, I just take it out now because I'm like, I'm not going to dive into this subject. I did a whole review on CB Steele's book, and I don't think that I talked about much of his plot or like a lot of it. And it's not because it wasn't good. It's just not what resonated most with me. And when I found myself trying to like just include it because I felt like it needed to be there, it just felt bad. Like it just felt very analytical and like anecdotal. And it was just kind of pointless, in my opinion, for my review. So yeah, I think that natural feel, I think it's super helpful if you enjoy it. Jay Kristoff, it's very funny. I watched an interview where they asked him about his spice. The two things he did is he said he had a friend text him and he was watching porn for 4 days to learn all of the moves and things. He's like, you won't believe me. Jay's video of it is much funnier, but yeah, it was a very heavily researched topic. But then his beta readers, I think, are majority female too, which was a huge thing. I would say if you have somebody in your life that you want to see if the emotion piece of it lands and makes sense, I would definitely reach out to that person to read that section if they're like somebody that is willing to beta read or even like section read. I don't know what it would be called, but just read that piece of it.
That's honestly really good advice. Again, we're having such a good time, but we are coming near to the end of this episode. And as always, I always have one last question that I want to ask you. If you could see more of one thing in romance within like sci-fi and fantasy books, whether it's like specific tropes or representation or spice level, slow burn, whatever, what would that be? And why does it matter to the genre's future?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm a terrible trope person for the sheer fact that I don't know what tropes are. Not that I don't know what they are, but like I could never like pinpoint a trope. People will say something to me and I'm like, oh yeah, that's a trope. But I would love to see more intention behind it. I think sometimes it will get there, but it starts off a little rocky. I think that going into it and like planning it out ahead of time and making the romance more of a focal point than the lust, I think for me personally would really make a difference. But I think sci-fi specifically, like this is Dinneman did an interview at Dragonsteel where he called it science friction will be the next big thing. Um and what he went into about that though was like he referenced Gideon the Ninth and he's like lesbian necromancers in space. He's like, what more do you need to hear to want to pick up a book? You know what I mean? And I was like, that's actually dope and like a great example of it. But I think sci-fi is very much lacking where fantasy has picked this up and romantasy has become a very forefront thing. You do not hear a lot about stuff like Amber Toro is doing. You know, there are some authors out there doing it and starting to mix it in, but a lot of what you see in like the space of like sci-fi or space is they call it, I think paranormal romance is the term for it, but that is a romance book. That is not a sci-fi book in my opinion. Like it has sci-fi elements, sure, but it's a paranormal romance. You know what I mean? It's aliens in space that are in love or whatever the case may be. I think like Amber's book, she took a space opera and coupled romance directly to it in that like 50-50 split. And I think like even Sun Eater is a good example of like the romance is definitely a very it's a subplot, but it's pivotal to the story, but it's not the same. It's Amber, you know, in my opinion, nailed what I think needs to become the more forefront thing and what I think will be the next big thing. I think that you see a huge amount of romantasy readers reading Red Rising right now, for example. That genre jump is because Pierce Brown writes such an emotional story and hits those emotional beats. And there's, you know, they're so few and far between, but the romantic lines that come out of that book that are often quoted are like next level. Like you don't even get them out of contemporary a lot of the time. But I think this is the shift. I personally believe that is the next big shift in the genre. Is like Dinneman said, sci friction or science friction. I think it's sci-mantasy. I think sci-mantasy is the next huge thing that's going to start to really gain a ton of popularity.
All right, people, keep an eye out. Follow Amber. She's paving the way for people. Excellent. Devin, could you tell the people where can they find you?
Sure. It is Bromantasy on everything. So bromantasy.com is the blog, and then it's Bromantasy on all socials. If you really want to interact with me, it's Instagram. I am awful on everything else. I wait way too long to answer DMs if I check them on anything but Instagram. So
can't confirm. That's how we arranged this interview.
I'm very responsive there.
No worries, but thank you for coming on to the show, Devin. Really
thank you for having me, Michael. I appreciate it.
Of course. And folks, remember, until next time, let's be author adjacent together.
Bye, y'all.
We survived again!